they're pretty good at like picking stuff up. So today I have Cal Maskery with us, and Cal is. Are you still the director of Harvest House? Or are you
founding director?
You're founding director.
I gave up that role in August. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so Cal's got quite a story of how he came to Christ and how Harvest House began and all of those things. So yeah, why don't we just start out? Tell us about your childhood growing up, like your background, and then how you came to Jesus.
Well, I grew up in Toronto. I was born in 1960 in Toronto, and Mom and Dad were just kids when they had me. My mother had just turned 16 on February 7th, and I was born March 14th. My dad was just a year older, and during that season,
So they were kind of like kids having kids,
They were kids
right?
having kids, yeah. They were just working things out themselves, and my dad, in the pressure of a family, he went out and committed some armed robberies in Toronto. Crazy thing to do. Did 5, I think. Called him the Rifleman back then. And anyway, he got caught for that, so he got 5 years in prison. While he was gone during that 5 years, my mom was still only a kid herself, 17, her husband's in prison, and she met another guy while he was gone, and my dad learned about it, so he sent someone out on a pass to knock on her door and say, "Maggie, I got a message for you from Cliff. Get rid of the guy you're with or else." So that spooked her bad, and she left the country and never came back. She'd been gone like 55, or at least 55 years now, 57 years. Went to California. So we lost touch from the time I was 4. And then around the age of 16, we reconnected, and I went down to California for 4 months, came back. She said, "You're going to end up in prison just like your father, And sure enough, within a year I did.
Right.
I was in and out, 4 or 5 different times. But just growing up in the family I grew up in, they were all drinkers and using drugs, and it was a mess, sexually a mess as well. And so I just grew up always wondering, what am I here for? Like, what am I really here for? I always had that question, but I just couldn't seem to find the answer. Grandfather used to preach Jesus. He believed, but he was a severe alcoholic too, so it wasn't a good setting.
Right.
So I rejected his view of God. I rejected God because of that view at that time.
Right.
And finally, in my teens, I began to go visit my dad in prison and loved my dad. He'd hug me in the visiting room, "Hey, Cal, I love you." And I just thought he was the greatest guy on the planet. And it wasn't, then he asked me to start smuggling him in some drugs. And so I was doing that for a number of years, smuggling alcohol in and drugs into the visiting room. And
this was in Ontario, the prison in Ontario?
Yeah, maximum security.
Yeah.
So I learned how to do it, how to get the drugs in, and never got caught. But my heart was getting hardened during that time, learning to be deceitful,
right,
to get past the guards and stuff. And so I quickly began to fall into my dad's footsteps. However, in the midst of all that, God planted a major seed in my life where one of my older uncles came home and said he'd been born again. And so here I am in the midst of all this stuff going on, and we didn't really understand what was happening to Dave. We mocked him, But I saw a change in Dave. Look at all the other uncles, hungover and not doing well, and Dave smiling and happy. And he'd come pick up my grandfather on a Sunday morning and to go away and dressed up and come back all happy and chirpy. And I said, "Dave, where do you go Sunday mornings? You always go out and you come back so happy looking. Everybody else is still sick." And he says, "Well, I go to a little church up the road, Little Baptist Church up in Scarborough, Ontario." And so I was just curious. I said, "You mind if I go with you some week?" And, "No, Cal, I'd love to have you." Probably praying for me.
Right.
I didn't know believers prayed for each other, right? So anyway, I went, and I'm so glad I went. I didn't become a Christian, but I went for a year and a half because of the pastor. The pastor, when he'd open up his Bible at the front and start speaking from the Bible, I could see this glow around him. And I'm like, "What is that?" I saw something. And then he'd stand at the back door, and you couldn't get out without him coming shaking your hand. He'd give me this warm handshake. "Cal, so good to see you. Please come back again." And it was the first time I felt like a goodness coming from a male in my life.
Right.
All the males in my life were violent and reckless. And here he was, I just felt his goodness from him. I was really attracted to his spirit. And God used him to plant that seed. So my Uncle Dave, the change, the pastor. I didn't see it in everybody in the congregation, but I saw it in the pastor. And anyway, shortly after that, about a year and a half went by, I left the church, just, messed up, still visiting my dad and all that kind of stuff. And went down to see my mom in California, came back, and then the bottom fell out. My dad got out when I was 17. We got involved in some crime together, serious crime actually, turned into a robbery and a kidnapping in downtown Toronto. And I did 6 months with my dad in the prison, so I learned the ropes, and they should have never put us together, but they did.
Right.
So I was just learning and mesmerized by all this, protected somewhat because my dad was there, just a kid, And I hated it, but I hated being locked up, but I liked being with my dad. Just a weird relationship that we had. And then finally, he'd escaped actually from the courthouse. So I found him, strangely enough, in West Toronto when we got holed up together. We finally got arrested by the 14th Division hold-up squad in a motel in West Toronto. And I just saw violence there in the arrest. They were going to kill my dad and put me in a bathtub with a shotgun on my back saying, just move. And they told me the next day, the only reason your dad's alive today is because you were there. They didn't know what to do with me. I was 17 years old,
Right,
So
right.
that saved his life, really. But when they told him that, he was mad. He said, "You don't understand." He said, "I didn't want you to save my life. I wanted you to shoot me." He said, "I don't want to go back to prison." He was tired of it.
Right.
He just couldn't find his way out. So that started me in and out of that lifestyle. And every time I go to prison after that, I'd say, I'm never going back. Like, I'm done with this. And I would even pray, just because of the little bit of exposure I had, I'd pray, God, if you get me out of this, I'll never do this again. And God would get me out. And I'd go right back to doing what I was doing. And so finally I ended up going out west, got a 7-year sentence for robbery and kidnapping again, trying to broke into a warehouse. The guy was on the phone. I thought he was talking to the police, and we took him in his car to get away. And as I'm driving back to Ontario, I was just sick inside, and I said, "What's wrong with me? Like, I'm sick. Something's wrong here." Finally, we got arrested in Winnipeg, sent back to Calgary, and I got a 7-year sentence. And my last hope was that I'd go to Millhaven to be with my dad in Ontario, in Ontario. But because of our involvement in crime, they sent me all the way down here to Dorchester Prison in New Brunswick. 21 years old, doing a 7-year sentence, no family, no friends. And I went into a deep depression, really deep depression during those years. I ended up in had a guy stab me in the stomach, and it was really to make it look like somebody was trying to take my life. And I was thinking if I could make the administration think somebody was trying to kill me, they'd transfer me back to Ontario.
Right.
And that backfired. I ended up locked up for 4 months in segregation. And then I dropped into an even deeper depression. You see the energy Nathan has today. Well, I was like Nathan when I was 21 too, right?
Right,
22.
right.
Locked up in a little, 5x9 cell for 4 months straight, 23 hours. I was losing my mind. Real dark encounters with the evil one, wanting to become a Satanist. And God actually used a Satanist to provoke me. He gave me this ritual, how to invite, the Satan into my heart. And I'm thinking, I don't fit in anywhere else. Maybe this is my destiny, And as I laid it out, I clearly heard this voice say, "Don't do it." And so I yelled back up to the guy. He was actually called Satan in the prison. His name was Stash. And I said, "I can't do it." And he yells back at me, "You believe, don't you?" And before I could process what he meant by believe,
Right.
I just yelled up, "Yes, I do." Like right out of my spirit, "Yes,
Right,
I do."
Right.
And then I stood there kind of trembling a little bit, like, believe in what? I don't even know what I believe in. I'm thinking, I'm not talking about Satan. If that's what he's talking about, I must be saying I believe in God. And that shook me. That really shook my foundation, Mike, to hear myself say that. And then a few weeks later, Billy Graham comes on the TV, and nobody challenged it. They could say, turn the hockey game on. It was just one TV outside of our cell back then.
Okay.
And the guys, two cell blocks, where you look down at it or up at it with headphones. Usually it was a movie on or hockey or something like that. And nobody yelled, change the station. I never thought about it then, but they were listening. And it was the first time I heard the clear gospel, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe on him would not perish. And I'm like, can it be that simple? Like, it just blew my mind that it was a God of love that cared about me, that sent his Son to die on the cross. And I couldn't shake it. I did not want to become a Christian in prison. I did not want to do it, even though I was thinking about it at this point.
Yeah,
But-
because of the jailhouse.
Because of
Christian
the
syndrome,
mentality
right?
in there, right?
Yeah, right.
And back then, Dorchester was the max. That's
Right.
The other one wasn't even up yet, Renus. And so I'm just like, what do I do here? And finally, it only was 3 or 4 nights in. I couldn't sleep, wasn't functioning well, and I knelt down by my bed. And I was surprised that I did this, but I just said, God, if you're really out there, like this man said, please come in and show me. When I drank, I feel it. When I did drugs, I could feel it. And I'm crying out to God, see if you can be that real to me. Like, I'm in. I just need to know you're real.
Right.
And nothing really happened that I knew of that night. I didn't feel any different when I went to bed. But when I woke up the next morning, Mike, I always tease people, say, God snuck up on me. I was born again overnight while I was sleeping.
Right.
After I prayed, and I think he waited until all my mind was shut down and I was at rest. Because when I woke up so filled with this peace and this hopeful feeling that I actually thought I was dreaming. And now I'm pinching myself. I'm saying, am I awake? Am I sleeping? And I clearly remember my thoughts. This is like almost 40 years ago. If I'm sleeping, I don't really want to wake up. Because this is the best I've ever felt. And then I remembered my prayer. And I'm telling you, I sat up in bed and my arms went out. I said, God, if this is what it's all about, keep bringing it on. Like, I want it all. Just keep coming.
Right.
I got very greedy right from the start. But I was so filled up, Mike, over the next few days, I didn't even know what was happening, really. All I kept saying was, God, please don't leave. My mother left when I was a kid. My dad left when I was a kid. And I'm saying, God, please don't let me do something stupid and you leave. Like, just keep doing what you're doing. And then I wrote my Aunt Joy. And she said, Cal, please read the Gospel of John. And if anybody's never done that, I challenge you to read the Gospel of John, not knowing anything. Just read it. And as I began to read it and talked about Jesus, said three things. I'm going to die for the sins of the world, which I'd already heard about. Second thing was, after I rise from the dead, I'm thinking, like, who does that? Who does that? What are the religious leaders ever done that? Jesus rises from the dead. And I'm getting hooked at this point. Tears are starting to come down my cheeks. I don't know what's going on. I'm not in pain. And then he said, when I go back to the Father, I'm going to ask him to fill all you who believe with the Comforter. The word was Comforter in the King James. I'm going to ask God to fill all those who believe with the Comforter. And when I heard that word Comforter, Mike, my whole mind, I said, that's what I've been looking for all my life.
Right.
That's what addicts are looking for. I knew in a moment what addicts were looking for. I knew what alcoholics were looking for. People that are empty and got this hole in their life are trying to fill it with all kinds of stuff, and none of it lasts. But this Comforter had come into my life, and that's when I knew that I'd been born again. After I was reading through the Gospel of John and this presence that I had, it was just, and he was here to stay.
Yeah.
And that's been this fall will be 40 years. And he's been with me all the way through this journey. And then my next prayer was, I didn't know, the Bible. I said, God.
So how long had you been in Dorchester at this point? Like
about a year and a half.
a year and a half, yeah.
About a year and a half.
Yeah.
I still had 3 more years to do. And after I got out of lockup, I went to the chapel. And everything that Harvest House is today came out of the chapel. Because when I went there was volunteers coming in, and they just love you. I remember the big trucker coming up and giving me this big bear hug, and I just froze, you know what I mean? Who was this guy, right? And then I see him go hug 3 or 4 other people. And I thought, that's just what these guys do. Like, they just love people. And I was so attracted to the love exchanges. And I would say, God, why couldn't we have this on the street? Why couldn't we have places like this chapel, this oasis that I was experiencing on the street, and reach young men and women before they make choices to end up in places like Dorchester? So that dream really grew in my heart, and that's what Harvest House has become. Everything we do at Harvest House is to create that community of support where people can be loved, they can be cared for, believers can be invited in. You guys come in regularly because you know the atmosphere there.
Yeah.
Believers can come in and give because we have a need to give as believers. And when believers give out, they're rejoicing. When people
it's a win-win.
It's a win-win
you bring
for everybody.
People in from the church, and then there's the community. And
so people that have love want to give it. People that have never had it want to receive it. And everybody gets blessed. So I saw the value of Christian community. So that's where my heart has been. Not so much the church structures, which are different everywhere you go.
Right.
And they're not bad in and of themselves.
They
but
just are what they are, right?
they are what they are, right? But when you experience true faith community, there is nothing on the planet like it. And that's what I saw. And I said, if we can do that. And so that's been my passion the last number of years since I got out. I met Rose, who was a volunteer. Yeah, she visited me for 3 years. It was a great part of my healing.
And so how long after you became a Christian were you still in prison? Like how long did it take?
About 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah, so 3 years as a believer.
You kind of were discipled and did some of your growing on the inside and had
most,
that vision
most of it was
for
through the
Harvest
Bible.
House.
Like the Bible became everything to me. When I began to read the Bible, about 6 months into my faith, I was restless, even though I knew I was saved. And I said to God, God, I know I'm saved. I know I'm going to heaven. I had that assurance. But I said, what do I do with the rest of my life? Like, who's ever going to take me for real when I get out of here, And Rose called me aside. That's how I really got to know her. She was just a believer herself, like only a year in the Lord. She grew up religious, but didn't know Jesus. And so she had come to know the Lord while she was at, it was called ABC. It's now called Crandall. She was at ABC. And part of the field experience was going into the prisons, like you guys do from here. And so we met, and she said, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And she said, God told me to tell you, you're going to be a preacher. And I had just started asking God what I was to do, but I was not a public speaker like I am now. Like I was very introverted. I could only talk to people if I was drinking a little bit to get loosened up. Very insecure, very inward. And it wasn't impressive to me at all to be a preacher, get up in front of everybody. I did not. I said, how do you know God's saying that? She says, well, she was walking through the park and his clear words come into my mind, tell Cal he's going to be a preacher. And she had no idea that I was praying, asking God what I was to do. 3 weeks later, another guy in the prison yard, walking around, I felt led to go over and talk to him. And the third time I felt this prompting, I finally went. And now I'm ahead of him, and I think, how do I drop back and start this conversation? He walks up to me, and he says, for the last 3 laps, I've been wanting to come over there and talk to you. I said, you're kidding. I said, the last 3 laps, I've been resisting coming over here talking to you. And then he just looks at me, and he says, God told me to tell you, you're going to be a preacher. And I'm like blown away. How could he know this? He doesn't even know me. Exactly the words Rose said. And the next thoughts come into my mind. If you're going to preach the word, you better know what's in the book. So I spent the next 3 years just diving into Scripture, and by the time I got out, it was coming out of me everywhere.
So you did
No.
you did Bible college in your cell, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You did.
Yeah, free.
You did all your stuff.
Free.
Yeah. Government funded.
Government funded. Yeah, thanks everybody that's over 50 out there.
So when you first got out of prison, like how did Harvest House begin? I know what it is now, but how did
What
it...
happened was I had to go back to Toronto. Initially, I wasn't allowed to stay in Moncton because of my violence, and so they forced me back to Toronto. And I really had to go and face some things anyway, so it was the hand of God. So Rose and I married the day I got out. I spooked her a little bit. I asked her to marry me while I was in because I knew I had to go back to Toronto. And so we did. We got married the day of my release from the halfway house, back to Toronto, stayed with my Aunt Joy for a little bit. And then I ended up working in a Christian bookstore called Mitchell Family Bookstore. And they were going to hire Rose, actually. She applied for it. And then she said, Cal, why don't you apply for it? So anyway, I did. But I said to the manager, I said, Bob, I said, before I even fill this out, I got to tell you, I just got out of prison. And I found Christ while I was there, and I'm living for him now. But I just want to be up front. And he said, what were you in for? And that was the last thing I wanted someone to ask me. And I said, well, break and enter, robbery, and kidnapping. And his immediate response was, I'm sorry, but I feel very reserved about this interview right now. And my heart just sank. I thought, if they can't believe me or hire me as a Christian company, they were a Christian bookstore,
right.
Who else is going to? And I walked out of there, kind of the weight of the world on me. But that night, God spoke to him. He was a Salvation Army man. And when he went to pray, like he did every night, God reminded him of a prayer that he prayed 2 months before. God, I'm getting restless in my work. I need a challenge.
And you were the challenge.
And I was the challenge. So he went to the vice president and said, this guy just got out of prison, wants to work for us. And the vice president said, well, what's the worst he could do? Steal Bibles, gospel tapes? Doesn't know the Lord now, maybe he will, So they gave me a chance.
Right.
And I was so thankful because I worked there for a year and a half. But what happened was I was witnessing to everybody coming in. But before long, I realized most of them were all believers coming in to get Christian materials. And so after a year and a half, I resigned. I went to Bob and I said, Bob, thank you for this job. I really appreciate it, but I feel like I need to give you my notice. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know. But I need to be out where people need to know Jesus. Here, everybody knows the Lord. And I said, I'm sharing my testimony, and I feel like I'm just, encouraging believers who are already in the faith. I want to get out where the people need to know him. And so I did. Rose was really, upset about it, really. How are we going to survive? Nathan was born then. I think Alicia was just born or right around that time. No, she was born back in New Brunswick. No, just Nathan. So we came back for a wedding, and then while we were here, we realized this is where we wanted to stay. I saw Rose, we were driving down the highway. Rose said, stop the car. And she jumps out and goes running through the lupins on the side of the highway. And I knew this is where she needed to be. So we made a decision to move back here. I had my own painting business for 3 years. I just saw houses needing painting. I didn't want to go fill an application again and have someone,
Right.
where you. It was hard. So I just started painting houses. And I did that for 3 years. I witnessed everybody, probably almost everybody whose house I painted. Word got out that I was witnessing. So the board of a mission called New Life Mission, which was a mission to troubled youth in the East End, called me and asked me if I'd be willing to become the director of their mission. And I'm like, what? Like, why would you call me? I never applied for anything. My name had just gotten out that I was out witnessing
Right.
and sharing, and a few people recommended me, and so I ended up with the director role. And I remember being brought in there, no training whatsoever. I hadn't even gone to Bible college, And they said, what would you do if you were the director? I said, I'd tell people about Jesus. I'd tell them what he did for me. I'd go and tell them, right?
It's a novel concept.
Yeah.
Right?
So we'd get ghetto blasters back then. We'd go with music, singing
Right.
gospel songs down the sidewalks,
Right.
downtown. And always somebody would follow us back to the mission, And then the Lord said, open up a Tuesday night Bible study. And I said, well, who do I invite? He said, just people that you meet through the week. So I did. I opened up a Bible study, and 14 people showed up the first night. I didn't know anybody. And then I said, wow, if more come next week. So I started tearing out walls in that little mission. Tore out a wall and a stairwell wall. And next week, 28 people showed up. It literally doubled the second week. And then I started tearing out the third wall. There was only one more left. And a board member walked in. Cal, what are you doing? I said, I'm making room for the people that are coming. We're having God's bringing people in. This is owned by a board of directors. You can't just do that. You gotta
Right.
come out. So I said, oh, is that how this works? That was my beginning of learning how to work with a board. So anyway, all the walls went out eventually. And then finally, after 8 years, they blessed me to go and start something else. They wanted to bring it back to youth and children.
Right,
I was
right.
reaching more adults, older youth and adults. So in that 6-month period, and they blessed me, they covered me for 3 months full-time and 3 months part-time while they went and started something else. And within 6 months, at the 6-month mark, Harvest House was birthed June 2nd. And it was just meant to be a storefront location where we'd invite believers to come down, serve coffee, and pray with people and talk with them.
And is that where it's at now on High Street, or was that another location?
No, it was just up High Street
Right.
where Mountain Road is. When you're coming down Mountain Road?
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
right there on the corner of High Street and Mountain Road. There's a car lot. You might have turned, maybe you don't remember,
Right.
but there's a car lot right there, and we were in a building right beside it.
Okay.
So what happened was there was 5 rooms up over top. A buddy of mine had rented it for the rooms, but the downstairs was open.
Okay.
He said, Cal, I got enough coming in for the rooms. You can use downstairs for the outreach you're talking about. And I said, wow, okay. So we started right from the start, and people started coming. Like it was amazing how it just took off. Then people needed a place to stay, so we filled all the rooms upstairs. Then we found out that social development would cover the cost of their room until they got working. So we had a bit of guaranteed income. Then we leased another house and leased another house, and finally we ended up with that building on High Street that we have now. And when we bought that, I had no money whatsoever. We went in. It was a cocaine bar, strip club.
Right.
And we went in one day, and the guy said he wanted $210,000 for it. I said, well, that's a lot of money. And he said, well, the house next door comes with it. Well, when he said house next door, we didn't have a place for women. I actually heard while he was saying there's a house next door, women's residence. And I said, okay, wow, that changes everything. So I started going ahead on the negotiations, and I wouldn't recommend this to anybody unless you know it's God.
Right.
But I had no money.
Right.
And so here I am signing on it.
But you had a rich father, right?
I did, right? I was counting on that more than I ever had. So anyway, here I'm getting ready to sign on this building for $180,000, and right at the point where I'm signing on it, a woman sends in a check for $30,000. Blew my mind totally, and my faith just grew.
Right.
And then I found out I didn't just need $30,000; I needed $45,000 because they wanted 25% down because we're a charity. So I actually needed on $180,000, I needed $45,000. And so we prayed again, and God sent the money, and it was amazing how that came in, more than we've ever had. So we bought the building, and we began to do outreach from there, and it just began to fill up, A few years later, 5 years later, 7 or 8 years later, government come and asked us what was our dream. I'm a visionary. I said, well, we'd like to have a second floor here, we'd like to have real beds, right. And so they offered me like $75,000 or something, and so I got bold, and I said, look, you asked me my dream. I said, $75,000 doesn't cover what the dream was that you asked me. So anyway, we negotiated for $151,000. Went out to the community and told them what we were doing, and businesses started supporting and giving roofing materials and cupboards. Their cupboards were all built by a company. And so I just saw the willingness of people I would call goodwill at that time. When we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and helping the broken, the hurting, even people that aren't Christians, business people started supporting
even
us.
the government comes through.
Government
right?
came through, right? And I'm thinking, wow, this is incredible. So my faith just started growing. And then there was a point where I said, God, what else could I be doing? And he took me to PEI. And within a few weeks in PEI, we had a place, we were meeting. God gave us a building, signed again with no money. And on the first, enough money for the rent came in. All the way to the first, the girl looking after the books says, Cal, rent's due today. And I said, how much? And so we pray. And she'd go down to the Baptist church to get some leaflets. And they said, the pastor left a check here for you. Exactly enough to pay the rent again. This went on for about 6 months. And then that place just took off. So that boosted my faith. And I said, God, where else would you have me to go? And then it was clearly in my heart. I couldn't stop thinking about Cape Breton. And I did not want to go to Cape Breton because that was 5 hours up and 5 hours back every week. PEI was an hour and a half.
Right.
And so I was praying for a partner. And that's when Randy Perry, he's a pastor in Macadam. He'd called me. I've only met a couple times, but we went on a mission trip to Ottawa together for 8 days and had an amazing time in 2 churches there doing outreach. And so he calls me and he says, Cal, are you still going to Cape Breton? And I just started praying for a partner to travel with. I said, yeah, I am. Can I go with you? My spirit just jumped. When you hear John the Baptist, the baby leaping in the womb.
Right.
I felt like that. Just as leaping came, I said, yeah, Randy, I'd love to have you go. When are we leaving? This is like Thursday. I said, Monday. I never planned it,
Right.
Monday. So he drives 3 hours to pick me up, another 5 hours to Cape Breton. And in 6 weeks' time, instead of having one outreach, we had 2. One in North Sydney and another one 40 minutes away in Glace. It was just amazing how God moved. And so my faith began to grow that God loved people. And even though
this was all just organic growth, too. It wasn't like a big plan. It was just like one thing leading to another.
Yeah, it was just trusting in the Lord. And I miss those days. So I'm about to launch out into some new things that I'll talk to you about maybe in a few weeks.
Well, there's something about the pioneer days.
I missed that. I love it.
Yeah.
Harvest House is growing so much today. We got like 30 full-time staff now and another 15
Well, and you just have to be more intentional and organized. And, when you get to a certain...
Yeah, you do.
Grow,
that's not me.
Because it turns to chaos if you don't manage it somehow.
That's right.
So.
And having me there alone, I would have been.
Yeah,
so I started praying, God, bring in people more skilled than I am. And he has. He brought in people with incredible skills, way more skilled than I am in administration and promotion. And so now I'm free to go back to the relational things that I really enjoy, and the mission training and outreach events and hope rallies. And they've kind of been shut down since COVID, but hopefully soon we'll get going back
Right,
out with those outreaches. I know you're hard for that because you're heading to Honduras. Did you say you're going to? Or
Yeah, in a
next
week. In a week we'll be out flying to Honduras.
So you know the joy of taking
Yeah.
teams out to impact
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah.
That, and I love that. I'm
Yeah.
addicted to that. That kind of presence is.
Well, and I'm like you too. Like I love being a coach. I love doing the ministry. I do administration because I have to,
Right.
but it's not really my favorite
Yeah.
part of things.
You like impacting.
I like
taking teams.
I like the
out.
actual, the hands-on part. So.
Yeah, and that's me. And so
As long as somebody else can do the other part, that's it all works, right? Yeah.
So we brought in Mark Beliveau, I think
Yeah.
about 3 years ago. He was director of the Red Cross for 7 years, and he was just looking for an opportunity of a faith-based place where
Right.
he shares faith. And so we brought him on, and I think it was 2.5 years ago, 3 years this year. I'm thinking it could be 4. I'm not sure now. But anyway, he's super skilled in partnerships, and he's growing the mission.
And you've got some other
exponentially.
locations too, like you're in Woodstock.
Yeah,
and,
we're now in Woodstock, Plaster Rock, Grand Falls, Windsor, Nova Scotia. There's still one operative in PEI, and other locations are asking. So with me, moving on into a different capacity, I'll be able to help, with outreaches like that.
Right.
And some new initiatives that I'll be beginning in the next little bit. I'm just in the middle of another, transition here with the board as to where I'm going. And I'll always be supportive of Harvest House. I love what God has developed there. But there's some other things that are brewing, and I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm really excited
Yeah.
to get back to just following the prompting.
Oh, and one of the things that I've noticed, like when you start taking government money, there's always I've seen other organizations that the gospel kind of gets played down, and other things get pushed to the forefront. And one of the things I've always appreciated about Harvest House is that the gospel has stayed front and center.
Yeah, it has to.
Yeah.
It has to. They can do it in other parts for other business people to join in, but we put out stories regularly about how Jesus has changed lives.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't deny that.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be a part of something that did, because what would we be without him? But
Right.
the reason we're all here doing what we're doing is because of Jesus.
Well, that's
He's
the key to
transformed us.
transformation.
Yeah.
The other stuff is, is good, but sometimes it's like putting Band-Aids on an open wound if you don't get that heart transformation. Especially the more broken people are, the more they,
when they get impacted by him, they love him. They
Yeah.
end up loving him. They're just so grateful for another chance. I thank him still. I'm 40 years in now, and I just thank you, Lord, for giving me this chance.
Well, when I take students, where a lot of them have come out of churches that are, like a little more on the religious side and maybe not so demonstrative. And when I take them to Harvest House and they get in amongst especially like the men worshiping there, because men singing really loud and being really passionate in church is kind of an abnormal thing for some people. So they get in the midst of that, and you can see them. You can see them light up.
Yeah.
You can
And
see
these
them
guys
go,
will share their stories.
Yeah,
So grateful,
Oh, yeah, they're in.
And to see what Jamie's done with the Harvesters worship band, they're all recovered or recovering addicts.
Right.
And these guys are so gifted.
Yeah.
And you're right, they're loud, they're
And
passionate.
nobody worships like an addict, right?
No,
they're just like
because they were hardcore
because they're
in what they
addicted
did,
to
right?
Jesus,
They're
right?
addicted to Jesus.
They've got that all-in personality, and so they're like whatever they're into,
All in.
they're selling everything for it, right?
Yeah. One of their favorite terms. There's no high like the Most High.
Right,
You know,
right.
Get high on God. It is a high unto itself.
Yeah, it is rather funny that that the Harvest House in Moncton is on High Street.
On High Street.
On High Street
Yeah.
as well. So
And the Women's Recovery is on High Street, a little further up
right,
as well. So
right.
appropriately named, right?
Right. You're just taking them from one high to another, right? So
And they get it. And
Right.
they totally get it when they get on board with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us up to today. So I don't want to get into politics or anything, but I know that everybody's been kind of following what happened in Ottawa, and I know that I just know from following you on Facebook that you actually went and you were kind of in the middle of Ottawa while that was going on. So I'm just curious about what. As a believer being there, what was your experience and what were your impressions of what was happening there in downtown
I was just so
Ottawa?
glad to be a part of it. I hadn't planned on it. I really didn't. I was busy seeking the Lord on some other directional things, and I was aware that it was happening. And so I do a morning devotional every day at 9 just to keep our community knit together while people were kind of isolated. And so I think it was Tuesday morning, the day before the convoy was Thursday. Tuesday morning, and it wasn't prominent on my mind, but I always tell people, follow your promptings, So here I'm getting ready for my devotional, and I think it was just before, and I had this thought, call Mike. Mike's a good brother and passionate believer, but he owns 4 trucks. He's part of a trucking company, and so I texted him. I said, Mike, are you going on this convoy? And right away, yes, I am. Texted back. I say, are you going alone? Yes, I am. And I said, would you like some company? Love to have you, Cal. That's how quickly this happened. Anyway, and I hadn't been feeling 100%, so I wanted to make sure I was okay before I went because I had a cough, and I still have that. It's been about 6 weeks, just a little dry cough I had, but that's all I had. And I said, Lord, I want to make sure that I'm okay before I go because this COVID thing's been around, and I've been exposed to people at Harvest House. And so anyway, I said, Lord, if I wake up feeling fine, completely fine, I'll know I'm okay to go. So this was Wednesday night. I told Rose, if I don't feel good, I'm just going to tell Mike I don't feel it because I don't want to put him at risk. And Rose and I tested. I had Rose tested twice, negative, right, on the PCR test. So I wake up Thursday morning, alive, fired up, and ready to go. So I said, okay, it must be fine. And so I meet Mike. We go up to Harrisville Boulevard, and from Harrisville all the way right to Quebec, our first day's drive, Mike, not one bridge was missing people on it. I was so blown away right from the get-go. It's just that people were there supporting, and up on the bridge were healthcare workers, supporting us, and every walk of life, really. And so we're just pumped. Like Mike's honking the truck, and on the way out, we ended up in the news that night on the picture. Our truck was the one that was on there as we were leaving. And on the side of his truck, he has this, the movie by Ray Comfort, a 30-minute movie called 180, I think it is.
Okay.
Which he promotes. And
Right.
here it ended up right in the news, right? I thought this was pretty cool. So anyway, we get all the way to Woodstock. We finally pull in, and people had sent in money for food and stuff. I was blown away. People just heard that we were gone, so people wanted to contribute. We get to Woodstock, and Joel, our director from Woodstock, met us at the gas station there, and he wanted to buy us a bucket of boneless chicken on the way out. So I said, oh, wow, appreciate that. He said, I just want to be a part of this. Everybody wanted just to be a part, So he buys us some boneless chicken, gravy, and all the mix, and it's the first day I can't taste the food. And I thought, uh-oh, that's not a good symptom. I hadn't had anything like that. So we go on, and I'm getting the chills at night. But anyway, we get into Ottawa. I said to Mike, Mike, I could have COVID. I said, I can't taste my food. He said, Cal, we're all going to get it at some point. He said, I've been taking vitamins. I'm not worried about it at all. I said, really? So anyway, he had one bad day. That's all he had. Still loves me to this day.
Right.
So anyway, we get downtown, and as we're heading downtown, we got right down to where the Corps was just before. You could see all the people lining up, and trucks were in, and the police were there, and they turned us off to the right, and we ended up over across the Gatineau Bridge. And every exit coming back over was blocked. So we couldn't get back over. We ended up back at the truck stop that night. We ended up coming back. We were gone 5 days in total. But we had the experience of being with all the people that were supporting. But in my heart, I wanted to get downtown. So when I got back, as you know, I ended up with the COVID. I had to deal with that. Rose did. And we came through that, thankfully, But what I was impressed with, Mike, was the heart of these truckers and workers. It wasn't about vaccines. It was just about end mandates. A lot of the truckers were vaxxed. There were vaxxed truckers. There were unvaxxed truckers. And so when I'd hear people talking, I was so impressed that they were just there for one common purpose, to end mandates so people could make their own informed decision. A lot of them had got vaccines, didn't want to keep getting boosters every 6 months and every 6 months. So people were getting tired of it. But the spirit of it, I was just so blown away by the friendliness. But what we talked about all that day, the first day we went out, was the smiling, happy faces that I hadn't seen like that for I don't know when. So 2 weeks later, I'd follow another prompting. I'd just give Kayla a call on a Thursday, and Kayla said, oh, Kenny and I are going to the convoy. This is the third weekend. And in my heart, I wanted to go, and I said, who's going with you? She said, just me and Kenny, possibly another boarder. She said, want to come? And I said, I'd love to go, Kayla. And then last minute, the other guy couldn't come, so there was a seat available for Rose. Rose was skeptical because all she heard on the news. And I said, Rose, just trust me. You got to come and just see the spirit of what's happening here. And she did, and I'll tell you, she was so blown away, Mike. She brought her stilts. She's up there on stilts downtown. We went down there on the Saturday. And what captivated my heart was not just the purpose of the gathering, but I encountered believers, that people like yourselves that will go out and activate, opportunities to preach the gospel with groups of people. And as we're walking into the center core, here's a guy over here preaching Jesus, clearly Jesus on the side of the road. A lot of people were just walking by, but he was still speaking it out. A little further up, another guy. Then there's this guy about mid-40s coming up wanting to hug everybody. He just said, God bless you. I just want to hug you. Is that okay? And he'd ask people if he could hug them. And people were responding like crazy. I said, Rose, look at this. Then we get up. Rose gets up on her stilts. I got a little copper in my thing, 5-pound, 2-ounce Buer, and he's just shivering. It was cold, minus 20. This crowds were down there with minus 20 and thousands of them. And I'm cold, you know. And so anyway, this trucker gives me a brand new hoodie to put over copper. He's still shivering inside my jacket. So then he jumps out of the truck, come on up into the truck, brings us up for 15 minutes in the truck. So I had a chance to do an interview with them about why they were there.
Right.
But they were just concerned about a Buer shaking in the cold. So I got up, he got warm, we went home shortly after. I lost Rose during that time, and so I found Kayla. Kenny was with Rose doing the stilt walking. I knew I'd see her eventually because she's 9 feet in the air. You know.
So this is more of like a street party atmosphere.
Oh
it sounds
man,
like.
was
Yeah.
it ever?
Yeah.
Was it? It was mind-boggling, Mike. The
Yeah.
feeling of being there. But all of a sudden, beyond the fence, over in front of Parliament, we were drawn like magnets. There was a group of worshipers. They had more effect than even those that were preaching at this point. There might have been 15 or 20 all gathered, and they were just worshiping current songs, you know, like you'd sing
Right,
here
right.
at the university. And you could feel the presence of God. And so Kayla and I were drawn over. I got talking to some of them. Who are you guys? They were just from two churches of the same group. It didn't sound like a denomination, just believers, right? They said, we just want to come and worship God and be a blessing here. And I was so attracted to what they were doing, but the crowds were gathering around them because they were so filled with joy and just worshiping God. I saw the effect of that right in the midst of this convoy. And I was just blown away at the believers that you would meet, church groups that were coming up, doing barbecues and giving hot dogs. And, you know, I'd heard from Trudeau, really, I wish he hadn't done it, but I didn't agree with everything. I didn't like the F. Trudeau songs.
Right,
We don't need
right.
to treat
No,
Prime Minister like
obviously,
that. He's
yeah.
still the Prime Minister.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I disagree with the position he took, and
Right.
I'm sure you do, but he is the Prime Minister, so we don't need to disrespect him in that role, as we're taught in Scripture not to do that. So I didn't appreciate everything, but not all of them were believers.
Right.
But what amazed me, Mike, was the presence of God that I felt there. I felt it in conferences and large gatherings of believers where it's like a bonfire, you feel his presence. But I felt that same presence here amongst a mixed group of believers and non-believers. Or brothers not yet. Maybe some of them are just not yet, but they're open, right? And then all of a sudden you hear them break out into spontaneous "O Canada." And then you'll see other times where they're praying the Lord's Prayer together, both believers and unbelievers together. They have a stage set up right in the middle of the convoy, and different speakers, doctors would come on, police officers would come on and plead with the police officers, don't be aggressive against this, they're just here peaceful. And I'm watching all this, and I'm thinking, wow, God, this is incredible. I believe it was a move of God in response to the intercession of the believers. Right? Believers are praying, and so God activates. And you look in how God used, Egypt to free his people. And he uses both groups together, right? And then in Babylon, God used the nations of the world to squeeze his people into a place where they would cry out to God. And so here, many of them were in that setting, and I thought, if they're not believers now, here they are singing songs. And then one video that I saw, a guy had called into a friend who was on the front line in one of the trucks, and he couldn't talk when he answered the phone because they were all singing "What a Mighty Fortress Is Our God." Like rampant through the crowd, loud. You couldn't even hear the guys. You had to wait. And then they broke into Amazing Grace. So here these believers were activating this stuff in the midst of the crowd, and they were all joining in. And I'm like, God, this is just like almost like a revival move or something, And I'm thinking, they're not all believers. I kept thinking that. They're not all but it feels like I'm in the midst of this kingdom of God experience, and I never saw any violence. I never saw any... and as a matter of fact, I heard truckers pleading with people, if they come to arrest us, don't react violently, go peacefully. And I'm thinking, man, they're just here in peace, demonstrating their desire to see mandates come down. And they've been portrayed as, misogynists and supremacists.
Yeah, so
and
your
all
experience was really different than a lot of stuff we heard on the news. And
I'm just so glad I went,
great,
Mike,
yeah.
and I'd never really had an overwhelming desire to go in the beginning, like I said, just a prompting, call Mike, boom, I'm there.
Yeah.
Couldn't get into what I wanted to see, but I saw the effects of it all,
Right,
all the
right.
people responding. And I thought, this isn't just about truckers.
Right.
God's igniting something in just common everyday people that just wanted to be a part of something, liberating for their country. And then when I realized it wasn't even vaxxed or unvaxxed, they didn't care about that. Many of the truckers, probably most of them weren't even were vaxxed. They were vaxxed, and then there was others that weren't vaxxed. Some were a little more aggressive than others, wanted to end vaccines and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But most of them weren't there for that.
Well, whenever you have a really big crowd together, you're going to get a
control
whole
everybody.
spectrum of people, and you you can't control everybody's behavior.
You know,
for
even
sure,
Moses,
but,
when he leads
yeah.
the children of Israel out of Egypt,
Right.
his first ministry attempt, he kills somebody.
Right.
40 years later, he gets to try this again.
Right.
And then there's people trying to take over his leadership.
Right.
Like there was always people trying to hijack the leadership of what God was doing, and God would deal with that stuff. Cain and Abel, God tells Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. That was his plan. The first two sons are born, and one kills the other. And God didn't stop working with humanity. You
Right.
can't control what everybody does. But I got to say, Mike, I was overwhelmed by how the majority of all those people remained peaceful. And when I kept hearing about businesses were being destroyed because they couldn't open and they were too fearful of all these truckers, that was told them right from the beginning that these were all violent protesters and all those things. So they reacted on that premise. The news picked it up. Anything I watched the news, I couldn't even watch news when I got back because it was all, these guys are violent, they're going to cause problems. And then I saw store owners who opened and their places were packed. I was in McDonald's down there and it was packed. Steady people coming in and out,
Right.
no violence.
Yeah.
Another store owner I saw go online. And he opened his cafe, and he praised the truckers. His business was about to close. He was struggling, and because he stayed open, he paid all his 3 months' rent that were overdue, was able to catch up on paying all his staff, and was current. And then they came to try to arrest him after this because he supported the truckers.
Right.
And all he was doing was letting in people like you do as a shop owner.
Right.
So when I saw all that, my heart grieved when I got back, when I saw how some of this was spun in a negative way. And I just... anybody that had been there would have a different perspective for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's really good to get the whole picture and not just kind of not just go with whatever images were kind of being sold sometimes.
And I was convinced, Mike, the day before that they actually moved in to remove them. I woke up that morning and I said to Rose, I said, if they went home today, I think their statement's been made.
Yeah.
Because you got to let things work itself
Yeah,
out. I can
you
understand
do,
the
yeah,
government
yeah.
not being able to let
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
get their way fully like that.
You can't stay there forever.
But
yeah.
you watched how during this protest,
Yeah.
the provinces began to say we're gonna end
Yeah.
mandate. So the message was there, and I said to her the day before, Rose, if they went home today, they accomplished what they went for.
Yeah.
And some of them, because they locked in till the very end, I wish they hadn't, but they stayed. Their trucks' windows were smashed. They were hauled away.
Yeah. It
80 some
turned.
odd
Yeah,
trucks
the longer
and-
you stay, the more
Yeah,
negative it turns.
I think they could have went home without any defeat, really,
Right.
and been proud of what they accomplished. And maybe it would have went over better in the government circles if they
Right,
had just,
right.
went home, because that's every government person said they wanted to end this because it
Right.
was blocking downtown, no question. But their hearts were in the right place. I think the ones that stayed were trying to make sure that it was written that these things. I don't think you can get a government to do that because they can't let you win in that way if it's just force either. The statement was done. The message was there. Public opinion. You watched it go from about 1/3 to about 2/3 wanting to end mandates during that time. The government may never acknowledge that the truckers had that much of an influence over the country, but their initiative, and I think it grew to what it was because of the fire that it ignited when their prime minister spoke those negative things, and a lot of people knew that not to be true. So people just reacted, and I think they've accomplished their goal.
Yeah. That seems like a good place to end. Thanks for
Yeah.
taking the time to drive down and to talk today, and I really enjoyed just hearing your whole. I've heard bits of your story,
Right.
but I just enjoyed hearing the whole thing, like just in one sitting. So,
Right,
and
right.
hopefully everybody else will as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, good to be here with
Yeah.
you, and all I can say is follow your promptings. God will take you on a journey of your lifetime, and just stay in the Word and follow what He instructs you to do, and it'll be a fun journey.